Have you ever wondered why companies can seemingly fire people without any consequence? Well, stick around because in this video, I'm going to explain why. Hey everybody, it's Brian from A Life After Layoff, and today I want to talk about why companies can seem to fire their workforce without any consequence whatsoever. And of course, this is becoming a much more common question these days because there's lots of layoffs and a lot of people losing their jobs. And we've seen all these people recording their terminations, which is generating a lot of good conversation. And one of the questions that I continue to see in the comments section is, well, why can employers seem to fire everybody without having any sort of consequence? They can just seem to do whatever they want and there's no repercussions. And other people will say, well, I think you've got a case, you should go off and file a claim. And I will say in a lot of cases, unfortunately, the odds are stacked against the employee, as it always seems to be. So it may not be so cut and dry as to whether or not you do have a legitimate claim if you get terminated by an employer. So in this video, let's break down the concept of at-will employment and how you, the employee, are affected by it. And one disclaimer here is that none of this should be construed as legal advice. Don't go off doing something stupid based on what I say in this video. And if you have specific questions about your own circumstance, seek out a qualified labor attorney in your area for more clarification and guidance. But before we get into that, if you're interested in more career content just like this directly from a corporate recruiter, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You might also want to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content. All right, so let's talk at-will employment. I think most people have probably heard of at-will at some point in time or another. So I want to explain what it is, how it works, and if there's any repercussions if you experience a termination yourself. You're wondering whether or not the employer can do what they just did. So the concept of at-will employment is fairly unique to the United States. Most of the rest of the world does not operate under at-will employment. And what this concept is that employers can terminate employees for any reason with or without notice. And similarly, employees can also quit their jobs without any notice whatsoever, without any consequence. So in other words, if you live in an at-will state, they just feel like it, they can terminate you, and there's really not any recourse that you have as the employee. And one day, if you get really upset with your boss and you want to kick over the planner, flip them the bird and walk out of there in a blaze of glory, you can do that too without any repercussion. In other words, they can't force you to stay there against your will. In other words, at-will employment. Now, there are other countries where you actually have to stick around for a certain period of time. You have to give a certain amount of notice. Otherwise, there are some implications to your final paychecks and other things like that. But not in an at-will employment state because it goes both ways. Now, of course, this is going to be decidedly stacked against the employee's favor. At-will employment is much more beneficial for the employer than it is the other way around because ultimately, in most cases, the employer holds most of the power. But of course, if you watch this channel, you know that I'm all about teaching you how to reclaim your own control and start to act like the CEO of your career. Wink, wink. Now, a vast majority of the states in the union have some exemptions that you should be aware of. And the only state in the entire country that I'm aware of that does not operate under at-will employment is the state of Montana. First exemption is going to be the public policy exemption. And basically what this exemption says is that an employer cannot terminate somebody if it goes against public policy or the public's best interest. Some examples of that is if the company asks you to do something illegal in that state. For example, if your company asks you to lie to an OSHA investigator who is conducting an investigation about a work-related accident, or if they ask you to perjure yourself on the stand on the company's behalf. Another example might be reporting something that's illegal. You see a violation of a work rule or a work standard or a safety standard, and you go and report it. They can't terminate you for that. Or if you're engaging in an act of public interest, in other words, maybe you get called to jury duty, or you have to go off and spend time on your weekend with the National Guard. Or if you exercise a statutory right, like filing a claim under workers' comp. So under the blanket of public policy, employers can't just fire you for any reason, even though at-will suggests they can. The next common exemption is under implied contracts, and this is going to be a particularly sticky one for employers, and they have to be really careful what they say. This is often why you see such ambiguous and vague language in employee handbooks and a lot of the documents that you sign in pre-employment, because what they're trying to do is avoid an implied contract. So if a supervisor says to you, we really need you, we've got a job for you for life, that could be an implied contract. And in theory, if they terminate you under at-will employment, you could have a valid claim for implied contract. The same thing goes for probationary periods. And the reason why you don't see probationary periods very commonly in the workplace setting is because it could be an implied contract. In other words, If you say that you've got a 6-month probationary period and the person gets terminated after only 1 week or 1 month, in theory, they could go back and claim the same thing, that you owe me all the way through month 6. And so employers could be liable to pay back pay or reinstate you through that entire probationary period. So if your company puts you on a probationary period in the beginning, they're either not that smart or it might be considered an implied contract and it could benefit you, the employee. Now, again, this is not legal advice. Seek a competent attorney in your area if you think you've been subject to wrongful termination. And if you're somebody that's been offered a job, you move across the country, you relocate for the purpose of taking that job, and then they rescind your offer before day 1, you may want to consult an attorney in that case as well, because you might have some relief there too. Of course, the biggest exemption is that if they are doing something illegal, they're legally discriminating against you. It's a wrongful termination based on age, gender, creed, nationality, etc. Probably all pretty familiar with those. But you also can't be terminated for whistleblowing and or retaliation, even in an at-will employer state. So the good news is that even though most states have at-will employment, they can terminate you for whatever reason, there are still some guidelines where they still have to be legal about it. But like most labor laws, at-will employment certainly benefits the employer, again, more than the employee. Now, when you're getting your job offer, you're going through your pre-employment process, you may want to read your employee handbook and all this, that stack of papers that they have you sign really carefully to see if you're signing off on something that says that they are an at-will employer and that nothing is construed as a legal contract, because I guarantee you probably will see that document somewhere in there. And the question will inevitably come up as well, should I refuse to sign this if I get the job offer? And here's the deal. You probably don't have much room to negotiate in this case. Employers have teams of attorneys who go through all of these documents to make sure that they're closing all these loopholes. So if you want the job, unfortunately, in most cases, you're going to have to sign it. I've never seen a circumstance where an employer made an exception to an employee who refused to sign that new hire paperwork. And so I guess the moral of the story here is pick and choose your battles. Now, if you're somebody that's signing a contract, whether you're a contractor or maybe you're an executive type, you may want to read that fine print really carefully and try to negotiate to remove some of the language that you can't be terminated for any reason. In other words, they just decide that they don't want your job anymore, they don't want to pay the head count anymore, and they can eliminate it, because otherwise you have very little protection in the employment world. And if you're somebody that's wondering if you have recourse after a termination or a layoff, unfortunately, it's going to be really difficult for you to prove if there was an implied contract. So make sure that you take really good notes, try to get everything in writing as best you can, because that's really the only thing that you have to prove your case. But even though employers hold most cards in the deck, we can actually start to reclaim control in our careers by making ourselves a more desirable and better marketed employee. And I have a website called alifeafterlayoff.com, which teaches you exactly how to start doing this. Because ultimately, the best check and balance that you have is being a highly desirable candidate who can move to another employer without any issue. And you want those employers to be clamoring after you. And to help with this, I share some of my deepest and most intimate knowledge in the form of some training courses. The first one is called Resume Rocketfuel, which is designed to teach you exactly how to write a resume that's going to give you the best chance at getting noticed for those first round interviews. So I take you step by step on how to write a resume from a recruiter's perspective. I give you a template and you actually follow along with me as I write my own resume. And of course, the purpose of this is to get your foot in the door for the first round interview. So once you get that first round interview, it's up to you to market yourself throughout the rest of the process so that you land with that offer. And that's where the ultimate Job Seeker Bootcamp comes in. We break down each step of the interview process in great detail. I give you tips, techniques, what to look for so that you can position yourself with the highest degree of strength. The ultimate purpose here is to get to that job offer, and I teach you exactly how to negotiate that offer so you don't leave a dime on the table. Listen, it is much easier to get hired when you're not submitting resumes. Instead, you're having recruiters reaching out to you. And in Unlocking LinkedIn, I teach you exactly how to do that. So make sure you check out those courses if you want an advantage in the workplace. Anyway, hopefully this video was helpful and you can use this information to your advantage to have better control of your career and how you operate. And like always, appreciate you watching. We'll see you on the next one.